Welcome everyone, it's Chobra. Tejo, the newest agent for Valorant, was just released this past week, and he has definitely been making the headlines, for better or worse. Now, I just want to get the basics out of the way. I think Tejo's a lot of fun. I think a lot of players are going to enjoy playing him. I think it might even help bring back some players, maybe that they were taking a break from Valorant. He's fairly easy to pick up at the surface level. And I think his design is quite appealing as well. So all of it is very, very good for the game. Now, on the esports side of things, I agree, the release schedule could have been a bit better, especially just because an agent like Tejo does a lot more impact to the meta and how it affects the game and things like that, more than it seems at the surface level. And it's hard to predict exactly how much impact it'll have until it's really out there in all the players' hands. So I do think this whole, 2 weeks, like barely 2 weeks right before it starts is unfortunate. But hey, at the end of the day, it is what it is. We're moving on, and it's in kickoff, and the teams will have to play it. So I just wanted to go through just quick my first impressions today about Tejo, but also talk about how do I think this is going to impact the teams participating in VCT Pacific Kick-Off here in 2025. Before we jump in, we'll just do a quick overview of the agent. So if you haven't been living under a rock and you know what the agent does, then feel free to skip ahead. I'll leave the timestamps down below. But if you are fairly new to the game and or the agent, then follow along and we'll go through the overview, and at the end I'll kind of summarize my overall thoughts about Tejo. Okay, so just quick rundown on Tejo. You've got 4 abilities. You've got Stealth Drone, 300 credits, Special Delivery, 300 credits, both of them only a single time use. You've got Guided Salvo, which is your signature ability, and it comes off of a cooldown, so it's not refreshed on frags, but it's just a straight 40-second cooldown. And then Armageddon, which is your ultimate, and that's going to be 8 points towards that ultimate. Let's start with the signature ability. You use it, you get the iPad, it's got a slight delay. It's like Brimstone, you've got that targeting reticule, and then you just press right-click to launch. It launches these 2 missiles that have 3 pulses each. Even if you stand at the edge, you will die if you take all 3 pulses. So just keep that in mind, and that would indicate that at the center, you can actually take out Killjoy's ultimate even with just 1 missile. You don't have to use 2, but it'll go on cooldown no matter what, so you might as well always use 2. Now, you could also do it where you kind of double them up, and while it doesn't like amplify each other's damage or anything, it just means that the pulses will go a bit faster, right? So you'll get hit by 3 pulses faster because they alternate because of the travel time. So you could do that if you know someone's hiding in a little corner. Then you can just make sure you're covering the entire thing, and if they're standing in the center, they're already dead after that because it's a total 3 pulses. Things like that. Now, generally speaking, the goal shouldn't always be to get a frag with this. It should be to zone, right? So it's to deny, or it's to take control, it's to clear out. So maybe you're not sure of that side of window. So you've got someone watching this side, and then you launch that, see if they're peeking out, something like that. That's probably not the best use case for it, but you get what I'm saying. I mean, it's great if you're pushing a lobby. You can use it on sewers, and as you'll note, it's got very long range, very fast travel time. You could be, wherever for your team, and you could help support, different sides, right? It's like, oh, hey, they might be pushing A, but I thought I saw someone C. It's like, oh, okay, well, let's just make sure that they're not pushing either side. And then you send it off, and you're covering the entire map. It comes back in 40 seconds. Next up, you've got Special Delivery. You press it, and then you can either left click or right click. Left click is just going to be a straight fire when it hits any target, like a wall or another player, whatever. It's going to settle in, and it goes for a little stun. It's a little concuss. And if you press right click, it does a little bounce. Now, do keep in mind that obviously you want to watch out for kind of wonky textures. So for instance, like here, there's that little circle that pops out. So I pressed right click, but it basically settles in because it's like bouncing off of one target and then the next. So you want to watch out for that. But again, great zoning, great clearing, right? If you think someone's somewhere, you just launch it. They either have to move or they're stunned. Yeah, it might be cosmetic, but it's still going to be a great clear, and it's fairly fast to arm, and it goes in a fairly straight line, so it's pretty easy to aim. The only thing is you can't do like crazy lineups because it does have an expiration timer. Poof, and it's gone. Last but not least, we've got the Stealth Drone. All right, so the Stealth Drone is a little spider bot. You equip it, you fire, and it starts going. Now, you could walk to cut sound. You could jump if you want, but jumping is going to make you slower. And then you can press fire again to launch its little ability, which is a pulse. Now, take a look at the mini-map. This is probably not the best way to show you guys, but take a look at the mini-map and just like how large this pulse is. it's still going to cover everywhere, right? So the only person not getting tagged is me because I'm standing behind this wall. But otherwise, it's tagging that corner. It's tagging this corner. It's tagging over here. If we can launch it. It's not that long. Right? But I just line it up. Yeah, it's tagging everybody. Now, when you get tagged, you get a quick snapshot like it was just one pulse on a Cypher ult. But you also get suppressed. And this is stealth, right? They can hear it. They can shoot it even when it is stealth. But they won't see it until it gets a lot closer. So your pulse goes way further than your vision. So you can kind of check the close corners and then you say, all right, let's pop it. All right, I didn't tag anyone hell. I didn't tag anyone like right at the entrance here, and I didn't tag anyone here. Sight's good to go in. The only thing we need to worry about is now over here, right outside of short. Things like that. Now, one thing to note is because they can't see it until it gets close, while they can hear it, if you are able to kind of get near them through the air, right? So using elevation, it's going to be a lot harder for them to try to spam it, right? It's just a lot riskier because you're giving your position away. And then you won't be able to actually guarantee that you're always going to fire. Like if it's coming through a hallway or something like that, it's a lot easier to try to spam it on the ground. So I think, you know, even maybe on Haven, right, you could try to tag it right before it lands so it can still tag hell as well. So do a little jump, check close. That should tag, you know, anyone here. It should tag anyone here. It's going to tag anyone here. If you have the elevation right, it should still tag over the boxes here. It's going to tag here. So I can see this elevation thing being pretty worth it. Well, yeah. In fact, I wonder if anyone's going to actually do like crazy double jumps. I don't think you can. That's going to be hard on the ledges. So yeah, so, you know, things like Haven A, I could see Pearl B being something where you could use this to your advantage, where it's just not going to be as easy for them to clear it. So it depends on what you value, right? If you value the distance and you just accept that if it's close and it gets knocked out, hey, we got the value there, then that's fine, right? You can still kind of jump around to extend its life. Because it goes very far, you have a choice here. You could even send it, I believe, all the way through a main right. Okay, so you would have to launch it right at the end. So you have that choice now. You could cut noise and walk it, right? So they're not aware of it until they see it. But generally, I think people are going to either favor the distance or the elevation, where you can try to just use the pulse itself as the actual recon. So it's kind of like a twofold recon plus a giant pulse for suppress, and it's invisible. It can use as a crosshair displacer. It's got a lot of uses for 300 credits. Now, last but not least, you've got the ultimate. The way you use it is you click once and then you choose the direction. So once you get used to that, it's pretty straightforward. Long wind up, long warning, and then boom, 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 boom. This is all damage. So you will take damage. You don't get stunned, but if you're stuck in it, you're dead, right? So that's why they give you so much time so you can move out of it. That should let you know that because of all that time, generally speaking, this is meant to be more of a zoning ability than an actual kill ability, right? If you're getting a kill, it's either usually because you comboed or they're like just straight up stuck and they have nowhere to go, right? So like maybe you used it like this and you know they're stuck in that corner. It's like, I mean, unless they're a jet and they can dash out, like they're pretty much dead. So things like that. Now the ultimate covers elevation, right? So if you use it this way, it is going to, we'll see the things pop up over here. Yeah, it's going to damage both everyone in heaven and hell. Now, when it comes to the guided salvo, since we're talking about elevation, it does have kind of a circle. So you'll see, let's launch it on the box here. It's got that little orb. So that's the damage. So it can cover some elevation, but for instance, if you launch it into heaven here, it's not going to guarantee that anyone in hell is getting damaged every time. You'd have to kind of step in towards the actual circle, the sphere, to get damaged. So all in all, what are my thoughts? Well, I think he's really strong. I think everybody agrees. I think everybody thinks he's really strong. Now, I think as a player, right, as just someone who's playing the game, you might think like, wow, this guy's got like so many abilities that can kill, which is where it all begins. So that's crazy. So now you think back to, okay, like the old Rays, right, with the double nades and things like that. The fact that you have abilities that can kill means that not only can they frag, that's like a guaranteed zone, right? It's a guaranteed clear because either they're dead or they have to avoid it and they have to move out. So it's like you cannot try to eat the damage, etc., because even if you're near the edge of the circle for the guided salvo, the signature ability, you're still going to die even at full armor. So there's that. But then you can clear again with the stun. But on top of that, you have actual controlled recon. You have a drone that's quite speedy, and it's got a lot of distance. It's got 6 seconds on that timer, so it can go very, very far with the walking speed that it has, or the running speed, I should say. And then it can tag. So even if it doesn't actually have vision, as long as it has line of sight, it's going to tag. And then it can suppress. So it's just like very, very oppressive. As everyone's been saying, it absolutely denies all sorts of sentinel control, and I totally agree. Listen, I think it's good for the game. I think he's flashy. I think he's fun. I think he's easy to pick up. That's all great, but does he have impact on the meta? Like 100%. 100%, especially when we were just exiting kind of this whole double sentinel type of meta. You know, do we go for that or not? Like, there are these options with Deadlock and, you know, then with Vice over the offseason and things like that. So it's going to shift things a lot. So in pro play, ideally, we're not seeing like too many kills, but if we are, that means lots of combos and good set plays are probably coming out. But on top of that, it just means that you're getting free space so well. So in my opinion, what this is going to do is it's going to cause a lot more early skirmishes where people are just using a lot of this ability for oppression, take that zone early, then you still have it for the post plant. Or you could just use like one thing. You could use the drone initially, and then you could use the salvo to clear close corners going to the site, things like that. Like, you can always trade back and forth, but you have so many layers where you're always able to take control and still have options backed up, and then the 40-second cooldown comes back. Maybe you have it for the post plant, maybe you have your ultimate. There's just a lot of early control that Tejo can force. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed. You have to go in and actually take the space. But as long as there's teamwork, you can definitely force a lot of space. So I think it's going to change kind of the push and pull game of Valorant, especially at the highest level. So who does Tejo favor? How is this going to change VCT Pacific? Does it really change any of my predictions? I'm going to be honest. I don't know if it really changes my bracket predictions. It might make it more volatile for sure. But I do think there are some interesting interactions. Now, there's two things to consider here. Do we think a team is going to play Tejo, and would they be good at playing Tejo? Or, you know, kind of like stand above the rest? And then the other side, is whether they're using it or the opponents are using it, is this team suited to play the meta and style that Tejo now brings to Valorant as a whole, right? Like, Tejo being in the game changes the game. Can this team adjust to that? Does it favor them? Are they going to be good at that style? Now, these are all very, very premature predictions because who knows, maybe there's some other crazy tech that we haven't thought about. Different combinations are going to result in very, very different ways to use agents and how they change the tempo. But just off the surface, like, we all agree pretty much that Tejo is going to force a lot of space clearing. He's going to be able to oppressively take space very nice and early. And then he's still great at post plant as well. So it's a lot of that post plant. That first step, that surface level reaction is like, okay, we got to skirmish nice and early to deny them taking like over 50% of the space and then having post plant control, right? If they're on the attack, or in reverse, right, having that retake control, things like that. So let's take a look at the buffed category first, because I think that one's fairly more simple, and I think it's much more just kind of like, okay, I think it's kind of exciting. So Paper X, originally I had them in the neutral category, actually, just because I think while they could use Tejo very well, I think Tejo is actually going to allow other teams to maybe match what they're trying to do, right, in terms of actually combat set style, immediately take space back, or, you know, deny that early space, taking the early skirmishes, things like that. So I was a little torn, but at the end of the day, you think about it, you've got someone like, let's say, Devi or even Forsaken, whoever it might be. Now they can be even further behind and still support at the same level and tempo that the front line wants to go sometimes for Paper X. I know they've been experimenting, you know, in different comps and different agents. So we actually don't know what this new Paper X might look like, or the old Paper X that is trying to become new. So we don't know what they might look like, but this could say, you know, like, remember that Forsaken Breach that used to lurk all the time on Lotus? He could do something similar here. Now, his position would be a lot more given once you use something like Guided Salvo, because you see the trail and where it's coming from. But again, you can support from a lot further away and still support that same tempo that your teammate wants to go at. So when I thought about that, I was like, okay, we should probably make sure that they're favored. And also just the whole, like, you use an ability, you clear it, you're trading, things like that. They're always so used to that while it allows other teams to catch up, I don't think it's going to necessarily like catch them off guard per se. Next up is Talon. They're mostly in here just because of three things, right? One is this is another team that loves to fight when they're given the opportunity, and so I think this is going to, allow you to turn those fights in your favor, right? Clear out those corners, maybe make sure that you can ignore the right side and you just have to fight the left side, things like that. And then this team is a team that used to experiment all the time in 2024. They were always prepping different compositions, etc. So in comparison to other teams, perhaps they're a bit more ready to adjust to something so new. And then last but not least, you've got someone like Primi. So going off of that first spot of they love to duel, now you got someone who's really, really good at dueling and trading. And now you can make their life so much easier by saying, hey, Primi, like I'm going to force them out of any of these corners, so they're going to have to just walk into your crosshair. Or, hey, I'm going to clear out these corners so you can just go in and fight the guy that we know is on that other side of the site or the wall or whatever else it might be. And so it's going to make that a lot simpler. I think it's a lot easier to kind of follow up on it as well. And it's pretty snappy. So, once you run it a couple of times, hopefully that the timing's not too complicated. And I guess it depends on which duelist you're running. But I can see a world where, they can use it to their advantage to bolster their star player. Now, DRX is probably the biggest one on here that people think is kind of interesting, that they're included on the buffed list. Now, we got to remember, this isn't the same DRX. It's not the DRX with the veterans, right? It's not the DRXs that are just doing set plays. It's a new DRX. They even changed their IGL in the off season, right? They're trying new things. They put their IGL on a new guy. I mean, Freeing's not entirely new on the scene, but he's new on the roster. And they decided to try it out, and it worked pretty well. So I think they might be sticking with that. And then you remember, you've got Hyunmin, who's looking very promising as a duelist. You got Flashback, who is, again, one of the top people that can go for these 1v1 duels, maybe sometimes even 1v2, as that Sentinel. There is a lot of consideration here in that while, yes, the old DRX, and I'm sure the coaching staff still is going to be able to cook up some crazy set plays and things like that, this isn't a team that's reliant on that anymore. In fact, maybe the players don't want to be that anymore. And now you bring in something like Tejo. You've got great aimers like Hyunmin and Flashback. Set them up for success, similar to the way I talked about with Talon and Primi. That's working out in your favor. Also, I'm thinking Freeing, IGLing. Maybe he might be practicing that Tejo a lot right now, so he's able to stand wherever, right? You could be far back and still support your team. You could be close and go in with the team. It doesn't matter because the range is insane on things like Guided Salvo and even the drone. So he could be playing Tejo, and then Bane, who joined in the middle of the offseason, is playing maybe the more traditional initiators, right? Or maybe Bane's playing the Tejo and Freeing's playing the Breach, or whatever it might be. You can now go for these more flexible double initiators where Freeing is playing an agent like Tejo. It's a bit more straightforward. Your positioning is a bit more forgivable, and so you can focus a bit more on the IGLing on top of the fragging, because that was one thing that really shined from him, is that he was still fragging while seemingly having some good impact as the IGL for the squad. So I think as long as, and Termi's been changing, he's been playing new maps and new agents as they come out. So as long as DRX is willing to, I think they could actually benefit from this. I actually think so. I think DRX might be one of the biggest benefactors of Tejo coming in. Now, Notion Red Force, the old SPG roster, is this a surprise at all? They love experimenting. They can go fast. They have some sick set plays. They've got great timings. They've got solid comms. I know I glaze them all the time, but the way they play, I mean, Tejo's right up their alley. So I would actually be shocked if they don't play Tejo. Like, this is a team, this is like the team. If I had to pick one team that I think is playing Tejo at kickoff, it's these guys. It's 100% these guys. So I am curious to see what they're going to cook up, because the way they were using some of the util, right, to combo with each other, like Sliggy and I always talk about the whole Fade Neon combo with the Prowler and kind of bobbing, right behind the Prowler, things like that, using it as a somewhat shield and also a tag. And then the way they had just a number of set plays with the Deadlock Raise, and sometimes even alongside the Fade, something like that, over on things like Bind with long range grav nets and et cetera, et cetera. These guys, they love to come up with some fun ideas. So they're going to be playing Tejo, and it's going to favor their tempo 100%. Global esports. Now, there's an asterisk here. There's an asterisk because they're playing with Darion, not because Darion's bad, and not because I actually think Darion was a great pickup to slot in for the roster since Patrick, who cannot be here for kickoff. But, you know, there's a question of okay, are they still going to have the same style that they wanted? Seemingly, they got a bunch of these like aggressive aimers who are somewhat self-sufficient, and then they can have a lot of fun with these kind of fun ideas and comps. I mean, we look at the coaches they have; they love to experiment. They love to have these nice in my opinion, but neat ideas, and that are going to favor, you know, quirky set plays. But now you're focusing on that like one fight, the two fights, and you're winning because you've got great aimers, things like that. The asterisk being, okay, Darion's great, and it seems to be that he will be playing Sentinel, right? Yudotan's going to be playing the Duelist, which I think is the better way to do it. As much as I would have been excited to watch Darion play Duelist again, I think Darion can slot much more comfortably into the Sentinel role for this team. It's just a matter of, okay, so now you've had to slot Darion in, and now you've got to bring Tejo in, or at least learn how to play against Tejo. So, like, you've changed your own game by working with Darion. Now, I'm not saying, like, oh, man, I was worried for GE before. I wasn't. I actually wasn't. I think Darion was great. I had actually zero concerns about the whole Darion slotting into Sentinel position. But then you bring in Tejo, and I'm thinking, like, okay, well, now this might amplify it just ever so slightly, right? Not that they're in trouble. So there is an asterisk. However, just looking at the kind of team identity they seem to be going for and the hints that we've seen, right? Whether it's, you know, with some of the core members in Spotlight series, and even hints of it during the like GE versus the World show matches, things like that. I think they would be willing to play Tejo. And I think they can make it work pretty well. I think they should be able to combat it just okay, because I think the coaches are going to be pretty on top of knowing what to expect when it comes to Tejo. Now, Boom Esports, they are on here because the biggest praise I gave Boom Esports going into Ascension was that they are a really, really solid skirmishing team. Their weakness being that if they didn't get the fight they wanted, if they didn't get the skirmish, if they didn't get the read at the beginning of the round, that's when things fell apart. The macro, the push and pull, the re-scouting for information, the re-clearing, the going back to the defaults, things like that. So once they got a piece of information and chose a fight, they're actually really good at it. And that's why I gave them a lot of points, because in Ascension, I think I was expecting a lot of teams to play a similar style. It's just that Boom was kind of the master of that within that level of play. And I would say that it turned out to be fairly correct. And obviously, 4 out of the 5 players are still the same. DOS9, if anything, he's like a stronger anchor for that style now, right, of trading and skirmishing. And so I'm thinking Tejo's good for that, right? You're immediately able to just force that space in your favor. If there's anyone there, you're trading off of it. If not, now you've gotten closer and you have the tempo, whether it's defense or attack. So even on defense, you can use his abilities to push out, get that, even if you don't get the fight. Now you've got great retake util as well. So I think they should be able to use it well. The only question mark we have for them is how fast are they at adapting to new agents, new things like that, so new metas. Now, this is something that they were also very aware of. They said right after Ascension that they were behind on the meta, and they recognized that, and that was a problem that they had, and they're going to make sure that never happens again. They also added in assistant coach Fields over from the old Revenant roster, so I think they're very well aware that they need to be ahead of it now. So let's give them a little hope. But I think style-wise, like especially over time, I think they're going to like the Tejo meta, but whether they can actually utilize it in kickoff is the big question. Talk about the neutral teams. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Team Secret, there's an argument that they should be in the buffed category, just because I agree with a lot of people. I think Envy's going to be a nasty Tejo. I think Envy's going to be a nasty Tejo. I mean, generally, he's just a nasty initiator, so it's no surprise. But I don't know if Tejo really changes anything for Team Secret. Let's put it that way, right? Like, you can have some cool set plays. You can have these long-range supports to clear a util and clear space. Okay, but they were always good at that. You know what I mean? Like, Tejo doesn't suddenly massively boost his capability. It's not like they had good ideas, but maybe, their aim wasn't quite there. It's not like, or it's not like they never really could have as many lineups. Like Jesse Vash is a master of lineups, and now you don't even have to have crazy lineups. You can just click on the iPad. You know what I mean? It's like Tejo does everything that they liked doing, they were good at doing, just a bit faster and a bit better. And normally that would be a buff, but it's also in my head, I'm just like, do I think that changes how Secret's going to play? I'm not so sure. I think it's a neutral for Team Secret, but at the very least, I also don't think it's going to, just because, let's say, other teams use it, I don't think that's going to ruin them per se, because they were very good at this whole like long-range support, setup, go in, things like that, get the recon, and then, you know, work off of those defaults, things like that. Now, the only danger being, where does Wild Oreo sit in all this if he does continue to play a lot of Sentinel? Because Tejo ruins the Sentinel. That's, I guess, not something we talk too much on the buffed category, but Tejo ruins Sentinels. And so if Wild Oreo, if they kind of hope that he can still find these setups where he can anchor on his own and go for these 1v2, 1v3 duels and buy time and pop off, I think you might be in a little trouble. However, from what I've seen from Wild Oreo, I don't think he's going to just eat it and keel over. I think he'll be very ready to go out and challenge people, have different setups, and, you know, maybe if they have their own Tejo on Envy, right? Like that's long range support, counter support you can have. So I don't see them having too much trouble fighting against it either. But in my head, I'm having a hard time imagining like, oh yeah, Team Secret, they're gonna be a Tejo team. Like I don't really see that. DFM, I'll just say it like it is. I have no idea if this team's going to use Tejo. I have no idea if they're going to adapt well to Tejo. Yes, they looked good. Once they showed us, right, especially with the way they use the Odin and how Art thinks about the Odin and things like that and how he IGLs, I think it fits right in with Tejo. But I'm just going to say the sample size is pretty small for this team. And so I'm just going to go with neutral. At the very least, from what I saw when they were playing well at the Radiant Agent Invitational, this team does not seem like it's going to be a team where it's like, oh, Tejo has just ruined us and we don't really know what to do here. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that they're going to be neutral. They could pop off. They could not. I'll be honest. This team was probably the team I had the most trouble with in terms of like, it wasn't even back and forth. I was just like, I don't know. They could actually have trouble with it, but they could not. So DFM's just going to be a neutral. RRQ. I almost want to put them in the nerfed category. Listen, at the core of it, I know I sound like a friggin' broken record at this point, but it's the team identity they got to figure out first. They're a team capable of skirmishing and fighting for space and forcing control and picking up tempo, right? Going a bit of an aggro team. They're a team that's capable of playing more control, set plays, etc. They just have to decide which one they're falling back on. And if they're able to do that, I think then they would be neutral, right? I don't see this team being like a Giga Tejo team. I think they have players who can work off of that, but I'm not seeing it as like a default go-to. Now, there's the big question of, okay, are we having, you know, more Raze maps, right? And are we having Jemkin play more Sentinel, which I think actually could have suited him quite well, but now Tejo is going to ruin the Sentinel, so maybe you kind of double back on that and say, okay, maybe that's not the play. You know, down the road, I could see them going for like some fun like double duelist Tejo comps, right, where they can really use that tempo to their advantage. But I don't know if they're going to have that ready for kickoff. So in all honesty, RQ's there because I think they have something else they need to figure out for kickoff if they want to do well. If they can figure that out, I think they'll adapt to Tejo just fine. Maybe it's not a massive buff for them, but I think they'll do okay. But if not, I'm not so sure. The only thing I will say is I can actually see Estrella doing very well on Tejo, just because, again, you can be pretty far back and still support the same tempo. So I think I could see that working out quite well. Where I think Estrella was one of those people that maybe wasn't always on the exact same page on the tempo, right, of the team, especially as the IGL. So he was always maybe a bit behind in terms of overall positioning, things like that. So now maybe Tejo kind of assists with that, where you can still support the same way, still have that power, and still have that impact. Now, let's talk about the nerfed category. T1. This is strictly because Meteor is such a big part of this new roster. And Meteor, his capabilities as a Sentinel, what he's able to do by lurking, by anchoring, by holding space, by slowly creeping out and taking space, things like that. Tejo was built to just ruin a Sentinel's day. You cannot just sit and anchor anymore. And if you push out, you're going to get pushed right back in, right? I mean, it's a very tough position. Now, I can see a world where Meteor, just because of how good he was in 2024, he figures out the right timings again to counter the Tejo. I could see that, but you can't just rely on like util setup and then take extra space elsewhere. That's not going to be as easily done against the Tejo. So aside from whether T1 uses a Tejo or not, I think this really changes probably how T1's been thinking about it. Also, they were going hard on the Vice comps in the offseason, and Tejo once again ruins a lot of that, right? It's the guided salvos, it's the suppress. There is going to be a lot of scrambling on the T1 side, and while they're a very talented team, I do think this knocks them down just half a step in terms of their power level. Obviously, the players are very, very capable of still being one of the best teams at kickoff for Pacific, but I do think it nerfs them just ever so slightly. Zeta Division, I just haven't seen enough of this team being able to adapt fast enough to meta changes. That's really it. So I think they might have some struggles with that. But hey, maybe this is what they needed. And maybe I didn't have the right read on the team. Willing to admit that. When it comes to Gen G, also was a little torn. Gen G notoriously, during the Neon meta, they were like, well, you don't need to play the Neon. You just need to learn how to play against the Neon. And they almost did until they didn't. And Zekken told them, well, actually, you don't know how to play against Neon. And I was like, okay. So that was rough for Gen G. I have a feeling they're not going to play a lot of Tejo, but I think they probably have a big headache because I think you were still trying to figure out, okay, how do we work with Foxy 9 as a Sentinel now? I think Foxy 9 is an okay Sentinel, but he's not a Meteor. And so how do we supplement that? Is it always having someone with him? Is it always a double team setup? Is it more aggressive play? Is it maybe using less Sentinel, whatever it might be? If they chose to use less Sentinel, then, man, they hit the jackpot. But if not, this is much more pressure on Foxy 9 now. Remember how we talked about teams are just going to target Foxy 9? They're just going to look to ruin his day? Oh, boy, it just got so much easier to do that with Tejo. So I think they're going to struggle. Like, I think even if the coaches have an idea on how to play, because here's the thing, I think Solo and now Perry and HSK, of course, as well, who's always been there, these are guys who were the legends of Korean CS, right? And if you look at how Solo used to play, how he used to IGL, if you look at how they were playing last year, a lot of it is rooted in that. A lot of it is rooted in the fundamental movement and positioning of a tactical FPS. I'm not saying that's the only thing they're good at. Obviously, it helps to have a bunch of players who are coming from other games with a lot of abilities. But that's what they were really good at. That's why this whole 1-4 setup and the adaptations they could have off of that, that's where it all comes from. So it's much more very core tactical FPS. Tejo, in some ways, is going to force that because you don't have Sentinels to just rely on, etc. But now everyone needs to be on the same page, right? This is where I think, again, a Meteor could have helped. As much as I said, it kind of depends on how Meteor plays on T1 and how they adapt to it. I think if it was on the Gen G, with the coaching staff, with the IGLing of Munchkin, they could have found a way to adapt to it because this is what they're used to. But now with Foxy 9, you're already trying to get him into a new system. He's probably going to get targeted. Can you make sure that everyone's on the same board of okay, this is how we still maintain space. This is how we think about space. And are they going to be able to do this without using Tejo? I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm pretty sure they're not going to use Tejo. I think they're capable of using Tejo. Most likely Munchkin would be using it. I think if they used it, I don't know, because of the drone, maybe it's Yeoman. I think they are very capable of using it, but I think that coaching staff much more favors drill in the fundamentals, get it ready to go. Now we can adapt to any map, any meta, which I think is a very good way to go about the game. But therefore, I think they might get actually nerfed just a bit going into kickoff. So, are there any big changes? I mean, quite frankly, T1 and Gen G, in my opinion, if my gut feeling is correct and they get knocked down just half a notch, that could change things up a bit. That could change the bracket up just a bit. If anything, maybe this favors Paper X a bit more. Maybe DRX now looks like they might have a decent shot at going. Talon, of course, Nongshim, and then G and Boom. Maybe now the whole if they hit their peak, they could look good right off the gate. Maybe now they've got that shot right with the Tejo meta. So it could get interesting. I think because of T1 and Gen G in my mind potentially getting just knocked down just a bit, I think that will create the shift much more than like, oh, these teams are just gonna play Tejo and win. It's not so much that, but it's much more are like these teams had such strong colors in how they understood the game and how they played. And I think Tejo kind of ruins what they've been going for the past year or during the offseason. Well, that's our look at Tejo and the impact he's going to have on VCT Pacific. Of course, this is all just speculation. Who knows? One thing's for sure. Every team's scrambling, right? Every team has a giant headache right now. Do you use Tejo? Do you not? You know, how much are we gearing towards like the later metas, and how much do we care about going to Masters Bangkok? There's a lot of things to consider. So I think it's going to be an absolute pain point. But we'll see if anyone comes out swinging. We'll see if anyone can cook up something crazy in 2 weeks. And we suddenly see that like Tejo is maybe even more broken than we thought he was. It's a possibility. But either way, it's going to be a crazy tournament. So if you liked this breakdown, let me know down in the comments below who you think is going to benefit the most from Tejo entering the pro scene here on VCT Pacific. And just as a note, I said this on my stream, but I will be looking to watch party all the regions as much as I can this year. So even in kickoff, you know, we'll have days where we're watch partying Pacific at home. We'll have days when we're watch partying China because it doesn't overlap that much with Pacific. And then a couple key games from EMEA and Americas as well. I want to do a lot more just trying to be up to date live for those matches. And also just the rosters are so exciting this year. So make sure that you're subscribing to the channel either here or following on Twitch so you don't miss out on those watch party live streams as well. That's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching and have a good one.